Hey there, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here, and welcome to today's conversation, which is all about why do people want to communicate with spirits? So I think it's kind of an interesting topic. Why are people fascinated with spirits? And we're just starting to get into fall here now. I mean, it's early September. It's still technically summer, but the days are getting chillier and nippier out. And when I think of fall, I always think of October and Halloween and spirits. So it's like, why not start out today with this particular topic? And so when I think about the question of why people want to communicate with spirits, what I really think about is what is it that fascinates people about spirits? And I think that regardless of what you believe or don't believe about spirits, there's an element of fascination here. In a very real sense, I think part of it is that we want to know that there's something beyond ourselves. That we want to know that at the end of our lives, when we die, that something is going to happen. That we're not just going to be rotting meat sacks in the ground, but that whatever animates us, that sense of life for us, is going to carry on in some form or manner and carry with it some vestigial personality. And so this fascination of communicating with spirits in part is borne out by this deep desire to know what happens after I die, or what happens before I'm born. Especially if we believe in reincarnation, and so you go from one life to another. What happens before I die, or what happens after I die, and what happens before I'm born? Both are equally valid questions to ask. Do I exist outside of the physical continuum that I happen to be in right now? And that's one reason people want to communicate with spirits. And I think another reason why people want to communicate with spirits is that they are interested in connecting with their loved ones. So, someone has passed on from their life, their father, their mother, their grandmother, their grandfather, or a friend, or something along those lines. There can be a deep sense of comfort that we're able to communicate with that person, or a sense of awareness that, okay, that person is continuing on. They may not have a physical existence any longer, but we're still in communication, and they're still around in some form or manner. So communicating with spirits for that reason can be a reason why people want to communicate. Oh yeah, and Brent says certain spirits have situational competency that I lack. Well, yeah, there is that. So this gets into the maybe the more non-human elements of working with spirits. So if I want to work with like an elemental spirit, or a fairy spirit, or a demonic spirit, or angelic spirit, or something along those lines, those spirits have access to information and knowledge, situational competency, as Brent said, some kind of ability or awareness around themselves that can be just as important. And so if we look at why people want to communicate with spirits, sometimes the reason they want to communicate with spirits is they're hoping to get some kind of information, or apply some type of influence upon a situation, or otherwise harness or utilize or employ those spirits in order to help them accomplish something. Again, perfectly valid reasons for wanting to communicate with spirits. And sometimes we just want to communicate with spirits because we're curious. We're curious about what those spirits might know that we don't know. We're curious about the world around us, and we're curious about discovering alternative ways of knowing. All of these reasons are valid reasons for wanting to communicate with spirits. And there's probably other reasons that I'm not even thinking of, that people would have for wanting to communicate with spirits. I think the key thing about communicating with any kind of spirit is that we really want to build in what I would call a relationship of reciprocality with the spirit. And what I mean by that is a relationship where we're giving in order to get, where we are doing something with that spirit in order to accomplish a specific to develop a specific relationship with the spirit, but also to recognize that we have um, access to those skills and abilities and things along those lines. And again, that can be very helpful. Now, if we look at the typical approach to communicating with spirits, a lot of times what we discover is that there's a tendency to try to have power over the spirits instead of power with the spirits. We'll be told, like, okay, if you're going to summon a specific spirit, that you have to make sure that you call upon the angels, um, that you have to put in certain operations in place, and that you have to try and have power over them. Brent says spirits transform the living through interaction to turn the base into the refined. Yeah, there's an alchemical aspect to spirit work. Definitely. There's an exchange, if you will, like a transmission of sorts. And so when we communicate and connect with spirits, we are communicating and connecting with the spirits, and there's an exchange that's happening between ourselves and the spirits. That's also just as important. When we look at spirit work, what we're really looking at is then developing this reciprocality. And so we do have these models where it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to have power over a spirit. I'm going to have an interaction in a specific way. But I would share with you that spirits don't necessarily we don't necessarily have to have power over the spirits in order to develop a successful relationship with them. In fact, that approach to power over spirits is really a very religious oriented, culture oriented approach that is built around an idea that spirits aren't inherently trustworthy. And I kind of find it interesting when people will ask, when I talk about or when I share information about working with spirits. Sometimes what they'll ask is, how do you test the spirit to verify that it's real and trustworthy? And I'm like, well, why do we even have that question in place? And the answer that I come up with is, the reason we have that question in place is that it's based around an inherent distrust of spirits that we've inherited, more often than not, from dominant cultural and religious paradigms that say spirits are untrustworthy. Yet if we go into a different paradigm around spirits, we find that that paradigm doesn't necessarily look at spirits as being untrustworthy. It just looks at spirits as being different, and that we can have a reciprocal relationship with them. Sometimes some spirits can be untrustworthy, even in that kind of a paradigm. And that's where you carefully look at the relationship you have with the spirit to decide how you're going to interact with that spirit. But regardless of what happens, I think it's worthwhile to consider that spirits are not automatically untrustworthy. It's like a person. You meet a person, it's kind of the same thing. As you get to know the person, you slowly build trust. And up until that person breaks trust, that's when you can trust them. But once they break trust, that's where you kind of discover, okay, well, I can't trust this person in this way unless they do something to rectify it. And if they continually do the same thing or related activities, then I learn that I really can't trust that person in a specific context or perhaps in general. All of those things can play a role in the way that we interact with spirits. And I think that that's a really important facet to this work. So I invite you to consider that, and also to consider, well, what could I do differently then as a result in my relationship with spirit? And my answer to you would be, try to figure out what your motivation is for communicating with spirits, and then ask yourself how you would want to be communicated with in a similar context, and use that as the basis to inform your approach to spirit communication. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't necessarily take precautions. Definitely there is some wisdom in taking some precautions. What I am saying is, take those precautions, but also treat the spirits with respect. And Brent says people that believe all spirits are untrustworthy tend to find evidence for those expectations. Well, that's right. When we go into a situation looking for something or expecting something, then that's exactly what we'll find or experience. And there's a reason for that. It's because we've conditioned ourselves to look at that situation in a very specific way. And it's important to remember that that's not necessarily true. So I invite you to examine your own expectations around communicating with spirits, What are your reasons for communicating with the spirit? Drop a comment below. And if you're new to this channel, go ahead and like this channel. Or if you've been on this channel, do what Brent did and comment on it, like it. That's what helps other people discover this channel and discover the content even more. And I really appreciate it when more people are getting access to this kind of information. All right, thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.